As we head down the aisle toward week 6, we've got something old, something new. These players in your fantasy lineup won't make you blue. All right, seriously though, these guys are going to go off in week 6. These are must start. I know they didn't make the must start section in our start sit videos, but I'm telling you, have a feeling these are some players that are going to have big weeks. So we do have a couple of veteran players and a couple of rookies sandwiched in between. So we're going to break down what makes them so appealing this week. First, I got to tell you that we are on the road to 100K subscribers. Thank you so much to everyone who's already clicked that subscribe button. And if you haven't done it yet, go ahead and take a second right now. It is quick, it is easy, and it helps us out. We appreciate all the support we've gotten. Let's keep it going. All right, let's start with one of those veteran players. You know, it was easy to kind of write off Stefon Diggs after a couple weeks thinking, yeah, maybe his best days are behind him. Maybe this Patriots offense is not a good fit. Maybe we were just a little too soon to judge that, because all of a sudden, Stefon Diggs is looking like one of the best receivers in the game again. That's right, back-to-back 100-plus yard efforts. And he's not just the leading receiver by far in that Pats offense. He's basically the only receiver in that offense, because they've gone away from all these other target options that are just not working. It's basically the Diggs show. Honestly, the only thing that's been holding him back has been play calling. I think week 1, he was solid. 6 catches on 7 targets, 57 yards. All right, a pretty good start. Remember, for a player who just missed almost an entire season's worth of action because of injury. But hey, not too bad. And then in week 2 and 3, no, they decided they're just going to target the hell out of Hunter Henry 11 times in week 2. And then in week 3, it was the running backs who were getting all the targets. The running backs got almost as many targets as all the wide receivers combined. It didn't work. They lost to Pittsburgh, and they barely beat the Dolphins the week before. So, smartly enough, decided, hey, let's throw the ball to our best receiver, Stefon Diggs, and guess what? They've been much better. Like I said, 100 yards plus each of the last 2 games, and that target share is not just growing, it is massive. In fact, in the last 2 weeks alone, Diggs has 19 targets. All the other wide receivers and tight ends combined on the New England Patriots have a total of 17. Target share is not a problem. And guess what? This week, his matchup, definitely not a problem.
Definitely not a problem against the New Orleans Saints. You look at it on the season, they've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers. It's like, okay, that's okay, but look a little deeper here. They've only had the 20th fewest routes run against them. So if you look at it on a per route basis, they're allowing 0.37 fantasy points per route run. To put that in perspective, the worst defense in this metric, the Cowboys, are at 0.4, and the second worst, the Ravens, are at 0.39. So they're pretty terrible against wide receivers, despite the season-long numbers not looking so bad. But the other reason why I really like Diggs this week is the way he lines up against his coverage shell. The Saints play cover 3 5th most in the NFL, 40% of the time. His targets per route run rate goes up 13% against cover 3. Why does that matter? Well, look at the research Ryan Heath of Fantasy Points did. He looked at the different coverage shells and how it affects ceiling games for wide receivers. He said, in matchups against a defense that's played at least a 38% cover 3 rate, players with at least a 5% better target per route run versus cover 3 hit 20 plus fantasy points 17.2% of the time. That's approximately a 35% better ceiling rate than all players across all matchups. Not only that, you look at the Saints, they only have one corner even graded inside the top 40. That's their slot nickel corner, Alontae Taylor. Everybody else is terrible here. But Stefon Diggs runs about half his routes on the outside and in the slot. But here's the thing. His yards per route run in the slot is 2.54. It jumps all the way to 3.67 out wide. So sure, he may struggle a little bit against Alontae Taylor in the slot, but when he moves out wide, he's absolutely going to feast. Like you said, he should be the entire offense here. Drake May probably not going to go for 0 touchdowns again this week. I'm guessing one of them go to Stefon Diggs. And I'll tell you what else. I love his line on Underdog right now. 56.5 receiving yards. Like you said, he's gone over 100 each of the last 2 games. Look, you pair that line with the Cam Ward gimme pick. I know it's Cam Ward, but I still think he can get at least 1 yard this week. That's an easy way to get a win right off the bat. Not to mention, don't forget, if you sign up using promo code ENDGAME, you're going to get a 50% deposit match up to $1,000. Plus, you play just $5 on this pick'em right here, and win or lose, you get 100.
All right, now let's start with one of those rookies. Of course, every week there's a rookie running back who's deciding this is it, this is the week. And last week it was Bill. That's right, Jacory Croskey-Merritt, just when he was looking borderline unstartable. Now you got to wonder, do I just have to start him and see what happens? And it's fair to ask, look, if you've been stashing JCM, he may not be, hopefully he hasn't been one of your top 2 running backs up until last week. But now you're like with this dilemma, do I start a guy like, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, or Jacory Croskey-Merritt? The answer is probably Jacory Croskey-Merritt, because this week he's going to get the Bears. But look, let me tell you that this explosive output he had last week is not a fluke. It's not something that I think is just going to disappear. The signs have been there. The only thing that hasn't been there is the touches, is Dan Quinn handing him the keys to that backfield and saying, it's yours, Rook. They just, they just want them to earn it, right? Feel like they're ready. He's clearly ready. He's been ready. Look, with all running backs on the season with at least 10 carries, he is second in explosive run rate. And if you tick up to just 12 carries as a qualifier, he is first among all running backs with 6.58 yards per carry. Now, those explosive runs, those big plays, sure, they kind of skew that, but that's the whole point. He's getting those big runs. And you know what? This whole Washington offense is geared toward that. It's interesting because a lot has been made about his yards after contact. That's definitely a good indicator of an effective running back. If you look at the top 10 list here of all running backs in yards after contact per attempt, well, he's 7th on that list, but 3 of the top 7 are Washington Commanders. You got Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez even. Those guys haven't gotten the ball that much. But this offense obviously is producing effective running backs, and that helps having a running quarterback. We say this over and over again. A quarterback who can run doesn't hurt the running back. It helps the running back. So JCM is in a great spot to smash, especially this week.
Yeah, especially this week against the Bears. It's easy to look at what Rico Dowdle did last week and think like, wow, the Dolphins must have the worst run defense in the league. And they do have a terrible run defense, but I would argue the Bears are worse. And look, you talked about those advanced stats for Bill. It lines up perfectly with how bad the Bears are. You look at it this year, they're allowing 6.15 yards per carry, easily, far and away, the worst in the NFL. They're allowing an 8.4% explosive run rate, 5th worst, 2.7 yards after contact, 3rd worst, and 3.02 yards before contact, which is also the worst in the league. So you have a defense who's allowing explosive runs, huge chunks of runs, allowing yards after contact and yards before contact, and then you're combining it with a running back who's picking up huge chunks of runs, explosive runs, yards after contact, and yards before contact. This is a match made in heaven here. I mean, honestly, on this entire list, even my boom that I'm going to talk about later, Bill might be my favorite.
All right, another rookie that we're waiting for that big breakout game. It very well could be this week for Tet McMillan. Look, a couple weeks ago, thought maybe there's a chance. He was good, but not great, and that's pretty much been the story all season long. He has one 100-yard game. It was like right on the dot. But where are the touchdowns, right? You can't really call it a huge game, a boom, if you're not finding the end zone at all. And we're still waiting, right? We see guys like Xavier Legette get a touchdown on just 2 catches. Hunter Renfrow has a pair of touchdowns. Like, how is this happening? How is Tet the only guy who's not finding the end zone here, right? It might happen this week. Look, he's actually been kind of, I guess you can say, sneaky good, which is hard to say for a guy who was the first receiver drafted this year. But look, Jacob Gibbs, guy that we know, we trust, and puts out all sorts of great stats here. Says so far, first of all, that he's been quietly dominating 30% target share in week 5, right? He's still definitely the alpha in that receiving room. 49% air yard share in week 5, and on the year, a 35% receiving yardage share. That's 6th in the NFL. But on top of that, his whole 5-game stretch here to start the season, it's putting him in some rare territory. Top 20 among all receivers who are rookies dating back to 1990. He's there with guys like Julio Jones and Andre Johnson. Now, before we get too crazy, now, it's not guaranteed he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but all the signs are there that he is ready to explode. His targets per game, 8.2 out of all receivers with at least 25 targets on the season, which is just about 5 per game, meaning any receiver who's at least modestly involved, is 13th, right? That's elite territory among all receivers in the game. And for what it's worth, Carolina's offense, not always dependable, reliable. They are much better at home. In their 2 home games so far this season, they've scored 30 and 27 points. And they just so happen to be facing the Cowboys.
Yeah, the Cowboys, who right now sport the worst defense against wide receivers. I mean, really, like, they've allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers right now, the most receptions, the most yards, and they're second in touchdowns allowed. But when you look at wide receivers who line up on the outside, like McMillan does, he primarily plays on the outside, they have allowed the most touchdowns, 9 touchdowns. In fact, 3 more than any other team in the league. So maybe, just maybe, this is finally the week where he scores a touchdown. You got to think it's coming. And what you always have to love about any team playing the Cowboys, not just because it's a good matchup against this defense, but you got to look at the Cowboys offense too. This Cowboys offense is an absolute juggernaut right now, which forces the other team to continue to throw and throw and throw the ball. So I think this is a week where we see Tet McMillan finally break out, show his true potential, have that monster game, get that first NFL touchdown, and go off for your fantasy team. Yeah, I think Tet McMillan has got to be in your fantasy lineups this week.
Now let's go back to the other end of the spectrum. Let's talk about a very veteran receiver, Davante Adams. This pass offense of the Rams is not only looking really good right now, it's all those two guys. Sure, it's mainly Puka. Look, Puka is the number 1 player in fantasy. He's dominating the NFL in receiving yards and targets, right? Number 1 across the board. But yet somehow, despite the fact that Puka had more targets than anybody else, Davante Adams, the number 2 receiver on that team, is 6th in total targets. You probably don't realize exactly how many targets Davante Adams is getting because oddly enough, he's catching less than half of them. He's got a career low catch rate under 50%, but it doesn't matter because right now he's sporting a career high yards per reception. Yeah, Adams 16.2 yards per catch, and he is getting chunk yardage. He's finding the end zone. He's getting targeted in the end zone. And so that's why he's a top 15 receiver in PPR right now. So look, Puka, continue, go out and feast. Davante Adams will continue to do it alongside him. And you figure the chemistry between Adams and Stafford is just going to continue to get better. And I have a feeling it's going to be pretty easy to connect this week.
Yeah, they get quite arguably the best matchup you can get right now, and that's the Baltimore Ravens. We know this defense decimated by injuries. They're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers, the most fantasy points per route run to wide receivers, 2nd most fantasy points per route run, to wide receivers. Also, like I said, they're allowing the most touchdowns to wide receivers at 13, and you talked about it. Davante Adams, if nothing else, has been a touchdown machine, like a guy who can score on any given week, because he ranks 2nd behind only George Pickens in end zone targets with 9, which is really surprising because Puka has 0. It's like when they throw the ball into the end zone, it's going to Davante Adams almost every single time. So this week can certainly score another touchdown. And you look at the Ravens, they run cover 1 at the 3rd highest rate. His yards per out run against cover 1 goes up 20%. Again, I'll use Ryan Heath, what he says about this. In matchups against the defense that's played at least a 36% cover 1 rate, players with at least a 20% better yards per out run versus cover 1 hit 20 plus fantasy points 21.3% of the time. That's approximately a 68% better ceiling rate than all players across all matchups. Look, we just saw Xavier Hutchinson score 2 touchdowns. Jalen Noel score a touchdown. Nico Collins score a touchdown against this defense last week. I certainly think Adams can get at least 1, maybe 2 touchdowns this week and absolutely go off.
And so it stands to reason, good offense facing the worst defense. How can you not go with quarterback Matthew Stafford? I mean, he's coming off 2 monster games against pretty good defenses. Like I said on the waiver wire video, he's got to be your top streaming option if he's available. Hopefully you're able to land him. Over 350 yards and 3 touchdowns in each of the last 2 games. And now he gets the Ravens. And so honestly, the only concern is like it's too good to be true. You know, we see this happen all the time. You know, a player who is just going off and all of a sudden it's like he's just got to cool down, right? He can't be this good. But why not? I mean, honestly, he has been so effective. He's got 2 of the best receivers in the game. Remember that whole back issue, you know, right before the season, which is why nobody drafted Matthew Stafford at all. And now all of a sudden he's looking dominant. Yeah. He's going to keep it up. He's just looking better as the season goes on. And a little boost here, they actually happen to get left guard Steve Avila, starting offensive lineman, back, who's been gone since week 1. So somehow this offense could look better. And honestly, I think they're going to be pretty motivated, even though Baltimore is kind of on the downslide because they had a pretty disappointing loss last week to the Niners.
Yeah, they did. You got to think they're going to be motivated this week, but I don't even know if they need to be motivated this week against the Ravens. You look at it over the last 2 games since that defense really has been, decimated by injuries. The Ravens are allowing the 6th highest pass rate over expectation. The Rams on the season, 5th highest pass rate over expectation, so they're a pass-first team. Ravens allowing the 2nd most passing fantasy points on the season over the last 2 games, the 4th most. Over the last 2 games, they've given up 8 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And you look at it, every QB they have faced, except somehow Jared Goff has thrown for 2 touchdowns. He threw for 1, but in that game, remember, Monty and Gibbs each scored 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. But even the Browns quarterbacks, the combination of Joe Flacco and Dylan Gabriel, each threw a touchdown against this defense. How does Stafford not absolutely feast this week?
Those are 5 players we both love in week 6, but we're not done yet. We each got a special pick that we think might go off as well. So, Chris, who's your guy?
My guy this week is Xavier Worthy. You look at it last 2 weeks, since he's been back, been fully healthy, he's tied for the team lead in routes, leads the team in target share, air yard share, first read percentage, and end zone targets, and he's 2nd in targets per route run and yards per route run. And over that stretch, has 18.9 expected fantasy points per game. That is, high-end wide receiver 1 territory right there. And it's no coincidence that since Xavier Worthy has come back, the offense looks more like the Chiefs. Mahomes, almost 600 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, and 1 interception over the last 2 games. And I love the way he goes, this Lions defense, like the coverage shell again, is perfect for Xavier Worthy here. They play the 3rd most single high of any defense. Against single high, his targets per out run rate goes up almost 19%. Again, going from Ryan Heath here. In matchups against the defenses, played at least a 63% single high rate. Players with at least a 10% better targets per out run rate versus single high hit 20 plus fantasy points 17.1% of the time. That's approximately a 35% better ceiling rate than all players across all matchups. They also play cover 1 5th most, and his yards per out run goes from 1.22 to 4.06 against cover 1. And again, Ryan Heath, going to keep going to him. He says matchups against the defense that plays at least a 36% cover 1 rate. Players with at least a 20% better yards per out run versus cover 1 hit 20 plus fantasy points 21.3% of the time. That's approximately a 68% better ceiling rate than all players across all matchups. And if that's all not enough for you, this could be an absolute shootout here. You have a great Lions offense versus a great Chiefs offense. This could be a game with a ton of scoring. Right now, Vegas has this game at a 49.5 point total, 2nd highest on the entire slate. I think Xavier Worthy is going to go absolutely crazy this week. You have to have him in your fantasy lineups.
Well, I'm going to go back to a matchup we've already discussed. A game that could be a shootout because you have 2 subpar defenses. We already said we love Jacory, Croskey-Merritt. I'm going to say I also love Deebo Samuel because, well, yeah, it's the Bears. That's definitely a part of it. But look, I think I just have to come all the way around on Deebo. He looks good. I don't just mean the numbers are good. Just watching him play, this looks like Deebo Samuel. Last year was nothing. It was like a shell of his former self. Sure, injuries have taken their toll, but he's just not at all the same guy. I mean, this is why we were so out on him before the season. You look at his reception perception, from last year, it's all red. Like, he was not good at getting separation on anything. Deebo, it's just not him, right? You can't just hang around the line of scrimmage and hope to take a screen pass to the house every time. You've got to do more, and he was doing nothing. And now he's revived in Washington, and I've got to be all the way in on him because he's producing. Look, I hate to say it, it is just factual. Contract year Deebo is a different guy, right? He had that huge year. He got paid. Didn't see a whole lot for the next 3 years. And now all of a sudden, voila, we've got another guy who's ready to get paid again. So look, Deebo is 7th overall in PPR scoring among all receivers. He has been heavily involved. Now, also full disclosure here, because you probably figure out we don't film this on Sunday evening, right? They're going to play at the end of the week here. I don't know if Terry McLaurin's going to play or not. He didn't practice on Wednesday. I don't think that he's going to be at least all the way back. Even if he does play, don't feel like he's going to be 100%. I don't care. I'm not going to base this on whether McLaurin plays or doesn't play. I'm starting Deebo if I've got him because the matchup is still great and Deebo has been great. On the year, he's top 25 in yards per route run, ahead of guys like Davante Adams, who we talked about, Garrett Wilson, and Malik Neighbors, RIP. Now you do know that Debo traditionally has always been a lot better against zone than man, but you know, the Bears, they're not really a heavy zone team. They play at a kind of a lower rate, but when they do play zone, they're really bad at it. In fact, they allow the most fantasy points per drop back to zone. So when they do that, they're going to get eaten up by Debo, and this secondary is getting worse. Jalen Johnson was their best corner. He is done. He's out. Kyler Gordon, their other good corner, who covers the slot receiver a lot of times, hadn't played all year yet. Maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't, maybe he's not 100%, and maybe it doesn't matter because Debo is in prime position to beat up this Bears defense. All right, those are some must starts, but remember, we cover all positions, all the players you need to know about in our start sit videos. If you missed any of those, it's all here on the Week 6 playlist.